without further ado, I would welcome Adam Grant to the stage. Thank you.
I want to take you back 15 years. I was working in one of my first jobs, and I was somebody who's always followed not only the rules, but rules that didn't exist, but I thought might, just in case. So I was the one who, when I got called to the principal's office in elementary school, and I found out I was not in trouble, I still cried. Because I was so terrified that I might be doing something wrong by being in the principal's office. And I was a conformist most of my life until I'm working in this job. And one of my colleagues is approached by someone senior in the organization who he's never met. And this person starts yelling at him and says, "You're way behind on a deadline. If you don't get your act together, you're fired." Now, I have a choice to make. I can stick to the rules as usual, or I can speak up. And I felt like this was an injustice. Someone needed to do something about it. So I picked the one person who I knew would be most supportive of me. My boss's boss, she had nominated me for an award the previous year. We had a great working relationship. And I went in and I said, this is unacceptable. No one should be treated this way. And I'm really worried that this guy is going to quit. And if you think being behind on a deadline is bad now, try not making the deadline if he leaves. And suddenly, I'm being dragged down a hallway. I have no idea where I'm going. I'm pulled into a dark room. The light goes on. I look around, and I realize I'm in a place I've never been before, the women's bathroom. And I wish that were a joke, but she tells me that if I ever speak out of turn again, that I'm going to be fired too. I made 3 vows at that moment. The first one was that I never wanted to have a real job. And I certainly didn't want to work anywhere where anyone could fire me, so I was going to become a professor where you get tenure. The second vow was that I was going to try to study these dynamics and figure out how could someone like me speak up more effectively, and how could we create organizations that were receptive to initiative, to proactivity, to voice, to people bringing original ideas to the table. And the third and most important vow was to never again enter a women's bathroom. I'm proud to say I've lived up to all 3 of those vows today. So what I want to talk about is what it takes to communicate your ideas effectively. We all admire original people in the world, people who stand out and speak up, the nonconformists, who challenge the status quo, who question assumptions that don't make sense, who drive creativity and change in the world. And we know a lot about how to generate creative ideas. I wanted to pick up where creativity left off and ask, if you wanted to write the sequel to creativity, once you have a good idea, you have some instinct about how the world around you could be better, how do you make that idea a reality? And it turns out the world does not suffer from a shortage of great ideas. It suffers from a shortage of people who know how to champion them, who can close the gap from vision to implementation. So I want to walk you through a few things that I learned that might have helped me avoid that treacherous fate that I met in the women's bathroom. The first important thing that I learned about speaking up was that I was going about it all wrong. I learned this recently from an entrepreneur who went to pitch a business idea of his. He went around to a whole bunch of sharks, and he said, I want to start a parenting website that people get to learn the truth from. He said, I've been lied to my whole life about parenting, and I want to give people some honest information. So he starts this website called Babel. And he says to all of the investors that he's trying to get to fund his company, here are the 3 reasons you should not invest in Babel. And he walks away with over $3 million that year. The people who turn out to be better allies are not the ones who share your goals. They're people who share your methods, who have the same ways of working, the same habits, because it's easy to coordinate. That's one of the reasons, for example, that environmentalists are often forming alliances with union members, because they're used to picketing, right? And they can immediately line up and protest because both groups know how to do that. Never mind that they don't have the same objectives, right? They can easily fall in lockstep and synchronize their efforts. So I would spend a lot of time as you're looking for partners or audiences for your new ideas, thinking about who works the same way I do, who conducts their efforts the same way I do. Now, one mistake that a lot of us make when we think about who our allies would be derives from the previous work that I've been doing for about 15 years. I was really interested in understanding givers and takers. As some of you know, givers at the extreme are people who are generous, who enjoy helping others with no strings attached. They share their knowledge, they mentor. Takers are people who are more selfish. It's all about me. They will volunteer for interesting, visible, important projects and then dump the grunt work on everyone else. But somehow they walk away with the lion's share of credit for collective achievements. And I thought, okay, the best allies are the givers, not the takers. Right? The people who care about making other people better, as opposed to saying, I'm going to figure out what I can get out of this alliance. And I assumed that we could spot a giver by looking at a personality trait known as agreeableness, disagreeableness. Some of you will know agreeable people as warm, friendly, polite, welcoming, nice people. Disagreeable people, more critical, skeptical, and challenging. And I thought agreeable people are givers and disagreeable people are takers. But then I gathered some data and found that there is a zero correlation between where you stand on the giving-taking axis and where you are on agreeableness, disagreeableness. Because disagreeableness, agreeableness, that's your outer veneer. Is it pleasant to interact with you? Whereas giving and taking are your inner motives. Right? What are your intentions toward others? So you have to draw the 2x2 if you want to assess other people accurately. The agreeable givers are easy to spot. They say yes to everything. And they are too worried about pleasing others to be supportive. Most of us gravitate toward agreeable givers with our new ideas because we think those are the people who will cheerlead for us. And they will in that conversation. But agreeable people dislike conflict. And so they will be afraid of rocking the boat in other interactions. And they are not great advocates for us. We're also good at spotting the disagreeable takers, although some of you may be calling them by a slightly different name. The other two combinations are the ones we overlook, and that's where we find our best and worst allies. Disagreeable givers are the best people to pitch original ideas to. They're the ones who are gruff and tough on the surface, but underneath have others' best interests at heart. And if you're having trouble recognizing these people, there's a Google engineer who put it perfectly. He said, oh, a disagreeable giver, that's like somebody with a bad user interface, but a great operating system, if that helps you. But these are the most undervalued people in our lives because they're the ones who give the critical feedback that no one wants to hear but everyone needs to hear. They play devil's advocate. They challenge the status quo. They ask tough questions. And I think we need to do a much better job pitching our ideas to these people because they are the ones who, yeah, they will tear our ideas apart in the service of making them better. And they'll give us better feedback. And then, if we can convince them of our ideas, they will run through walls to support us. You need to stop assigning devil's advocates and start unearthing them. Find the silent minority and invite those people into the conversation. People who genuinely disagree, if you give them a voice, those are the people who manage to change the minds of the group. Now, I've talked with a lot of leaders about this, and they will say, I love this idea in theory, but in practice, what if they're wrong? What if I go find a bunch of people who have a dissenting opinion and I let them talk and they convince the group to go in a really bad direction? And I will say good because I like to see leaders fail. No, I will say good because we have a ton of data suggesting that dissenting opinions are useful even when they're wrong. That if you have a group with a majority opinion and someone comes in with an incorrect alternative, the group has a better chance of making a great decision or coming up with a creative solution. Because consistent, authentic dissenters stimulate divergent thinking. They force people to re-examine their assumptions, to go back to the drawing board, gather new information, and that's ultimately better for the group process, even if the opinion on the table is wrong. So how do you get authentic dissent? Two quick things that you can think about. One is, you probably had a leader at some point who filled in these blanks. I'm going to ask you all to shout it out loud. Think about a boss who said a sentence like this. Don't bring me. Bring me. Wow. Go Canada. I've heard a lot of leaders say this, and on one level it makes sense. You want people to be efficient. You don't want them to be complaining or whining. But if you only ask for solutions, then you will create a culture of advocacy, not one of inquiry, where people can only speak up if they've already figured something out. And they think their whole job is to convince everyone else that they're right. Cultures of originality thrive when people bring problems to the table and say, I think this is important, but I don't know what to do about it. And granted, you want people to not just say the emperor has no clothes, but to try to become good tailors too. But I think it's really critical to create a culture where it's safe to bring up problems. Elon Musk had a great observation about this. He said that after they finally launched successfully at SpaceX, he found that they got complacent. And he had to make it unsafe not to bring up problems. And that was the only way that people voiced every error, every issue that they saw. The two leaders that I've admired the most for doing this effectively, I think, give us some examples that we could all follow. One is Sheryl Sandberg at Facebook. She's the most extraordinary leader I've had a chance to work with. And Sheryl has a lot of advantages. She's smarter than just about everyone. She's also a lot more thoughtful and giving than pretty much anyone I know. One of the things she does, though, to get her team to feel comfortable bringing ideas and suggestions and problems to the table, is she opens many of her meetings by talking about her own flaws and what she is working on. So I was in one meeting, and she came in and said, one of my goals is to talk less. I have never been told in my entire life that I talk too little in a meeting. And so I want to work on that. And then about 10 minutes later, it makes it safe for somebody to say, hey, you know that talking too much thing? Yeah, that. And when she's upfront about the problems and weaknesses that she's working on, other people are much more likely to criticize her. She models that she's open to it. And they also go and ask their teams for feedback on how they can improve. The other leader that I think is remarkable at this is Ray Dalio. He's the billionaire founder of Bridgewater, the hedge fund that is widely regarded as the most successful of the last 40 years in the whole industry. In 2007, they warned their clients of an impending financial crisis. Not bad. They can only beat the market by thinking differently. And the way they think differently is they have a whole series of principles, one of which is no one has the right to hold a critical opinion without speaking up about it. You can be fired for not dissenting, not criticizing. And the culture got tested a few years ago when this guy that today I'm going to call Jim, because that's his name, Jim sends an email. He's 3 levels below Ray, and he says, Dear Ray, you know that client meeting that we were just in? I give you a D- for your performance. You rambled incoherently for well over an hour. This was a huge client, and I think you blew it. And he goes on for pages like that. Now, I don't know a lot of people who would send that email to the billionaire founders of their company. I was pretty sure Jim was going to get fired. But Ray's response speaks volumes. He writes back and says, I'm sorry that I let you down. And then he copies the entire management committee of Bridgewater and asks them to go and do research on whether this is a pattern and figure out whether Ray has made the mistake in other contexts so he can learn and improve. And that's impressive. Then the co-CEO of Bridgewater copies the entire company, over 1,000 people, on the email thread so that everyone can learn from the exchange and see how open Ray is to feedback. And that's how you create a culture of dissent. Now, for those of you who are having trouble creating those cultures, I offer you one simple suggestion. No, don't actually kill your company. But this is an exercise that I highly recommend. I was working on a project at Merck a few years ago, and this consultant, Lisa Bodell, comes in. And she says to the senior leadership team, we're going to spend an hour brainstorming ideas for how to put Merck out of business. I have never seen a more enthusiastic group of executives in my life. Right? You have scientists who are like, I've been waiting 23 years to kill this company. But after the hour, they then have to turn around and say, if we've had some of these ideas, maybe others have too. And now we have to figure out how we're going to defend against those threats or seize those opportunities. What you see is that people are more original when they're on offense than defense. Right? When they're on defense, they play it safe. They're risk averse. They try to protect against lots of different possible threats. When they are on offense, they will think more widely, but then drill more deeply into some original ideas. And that's a much better way to jumpstart innovation than to just say, well, what are we going to do about all these competitive threats that we're facing? And I think it's a great way to get some dissenting ideas on the table. So the punchline for me on this is pretty simple. I have a great distaste for conformity at this point. I've tried to shed my early habits around liking rules. And I think that conformity is really dangerous. I think in a world of conformity, we get people who follow along even though they don't agree. That's not to say everyone should be a nonconformist in every moment. That's just annoying, right? But leaders need followers. They need followers who follow because they think the ideas are good, not because they're afraid of standing out and they choose to fit in instead. And so my hope is that whatever your role is, whatever your responsibilities, you can find ways to be a little bit more original and try to take action to improve the world around you. Thank you. This is actually a revelation for me from one of our extraordinary students, Justin Berg, who's now in the Stanford faculty. Justin was struck by the fact that there are tons of great ideas that never see the light of day.
Yeah.
And he went through the history of ones that almost didn't, like Star Wars and E.T. were both rejected over and over again.
Yeah.
There was some book that 12 publishers shot down, and they said it was too long for a children's book. I don't know about you, but Harry Potter was too short for my taste. And Google was rejected. There was a chance for Excite to buy it for less than $2 million, and they were like, nah, we're not interested. And every domain, you have great ideas that nearly didn't see the light of day. And it made Justin wonder how many more great ideas literally never got adopted.
Yeah.
So he spent a lot of his career so far studying how you get better at idea selection. And what he finds is that most of us are bad idea selectors for two reasons. One is we're too close to our own ideas, and we're way too positive on them. So knowing that an idea belongs to you is almost a guarantee that you're not qualified to judge whether it's a good one or not. And
No, I don't like that part.
Yeah, sorry. But this is why we have fellows, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So, no, I think that on the flip side, though, managers, in particular middle managers, tend to be the most negative because they can see all the bad things that will happen if they bet on an idea that doesn't work. Whereas, if they pass on a good idea, they're probably never even going to find out. No one else will either. So what Justin wanted to know is how do you get managers to be better at judging new ideas and more open to novelty? And he found that there's a simple way to do it, which I would encourage all of you to try. I have found this really powerful. All you do is you spend 5 minutes before you evaluate a new idea from someone else. You spend 5 minutes brainstorming about your own ideas. And he found that was enough to make you much more accurate at selecting new ideas and recognizing them because it puts you in a creative mindset. When you're just judging ideas, it's easy to be evaluative and look for reasons to say no. If you spend a few minutes brainstorming, you are invested in unusual possibilities. And yeah, I think that's a pretty simple way to start. One of the consistent themes was that as I talked to them about where they were at when they thought about making the choice to do something original, all of them said, I was terrified. And that just flew in the face of my assumption that originals were fearless. And what separated them from you and me was that they had the conviction and the courage to press forward. And they all said a different version of the same thing, which was they said, look, we were afraid of failing, but we were even more afraid of failing to try. And you could fail by starting a business that goes bankrupt, but you could also fail by never starting a business at all.